Alex here from Black Sheep IT Consulting, and welcome to a playlist that I put together to better understand how do you update your existing Siebel environment from anything before 24.6 to 24.6 and higher on the path to the Redwood theme. So I picked the Redwood theme as a option that you probably want to evaluate at least, or then use and bring to your end users. And as Oracle put it, the Redwood theme requires a repository upgrade. So it's a good opportunity to talk about a update process in Siebel CRM at great length and include all the necessary bits and pieces. So this is quite a long playlist, so you want to take your time and make sure to watch all the videos in this playlist. So check out the video description in case you have missed the playlist link. And so we will discuss, of course, the update process of the development environment, but also the update process of, or the migration part of the update process into the RR environment. So let's take a quick look at the steps we will discuss in this playlist. So we will, of course, run the MDE, and that means we will run it on an environment that is 23.10, so it's not too old, but also not too recent. And of course, it applies to your environment as well. If you're on anything higher than 21.2, where you have the MDE already, or even lower than that, and you have or have not run a repository upgrade, in this environment 23.10, we have already run the repository upgrade to 23.10, but of course we will have to run it to get Redwood. So we also, of course, have to run the post-install database update, and we will indeed run the repository upgrade and discuss all the necessary bits and pieces. So this part here, the first part that you're watching right now, continues on with a quite detailed discussion of how to understand and prepare yourself for that repository upgrade. Of course, you can just run it and see what gives, but there could be conflicts with existing standard objects that you have modified in the past. And so we will focus a lot on how to understand and resolve these conflicts. What tools does Oracle provide in the modern Siebel 24 world? So it's also about testing and delivering these changes, of course. And that is the development update that we will do in the upcoming videos. And also we will discover what is necessary to do with related to the runtime environments, the test and production environments, because you will have to use the migration application to migrate the changes done by the repository upgrade. So in the RR environments, the higher environments than your development environments, you will have to run the MDE as well, and that runs post-install database updates. So these steps we do not really repeat in the videos because they're the same as on the development environment. But then, of course, the fact that we ran the repository upgrade in the development environment requires us to understand how to migrate the repository changes, that is the repository.sif file imports, the repository objects, the manifest changes that are relevant for Redwood, the seed data changes, and the schema changes, of course, how to migrate all these into your higher environment and then be able to test it and, well, rejoice and use the Redwood theme for your end users or your evaluation purposes. So I hope you will enjoy the path to Redwood. And without further ado, let's get started. So here's a thing you would like to know about repository upgrades. They are delivered in the form of a zip file you will find in your Sieb server bin. Now here I'm on an older version of Siebel CRM. And if I look here in the zip server bin folder and just look for zip files in general. Then there are plenty, and there's one RepositoryUpgrade.sif. Now that's what we focus on. Of course, there's also post-install database setup zip, is the stuff that will be applied mandatorily during your update, but repository upgrade is optional. And if you're interested or you're preparing for a repository upgrade, it's actually very important to look into that zip file. You can just do that right here and understand, for example, what version is the current Siebel version, because 23.10 is the last folder in the sequence here. So that's a Siebel 23.10 environment. So what I've done is I've had a different machine where I have updated to 24.6, or you simply run the installer into a new folder and you get the latest repository upgrade zip file in that manner. And I obtained that repository upgrade 24.6.zip file from a different machine. I extracted it to a folder. So now I can see that it contains all the necessary optional stuff up to 24.6, of course. So the span in our demonstration update, we update from 23.10. So the span, the bandwidth, or the wingspan, if you will, for that update will be 23.11, 12, and 6 more. So that's eight monthly updates that will be cumulatively applied to your repository if you run the repository upgrade. So what's in those folders is different in every version, of course. So the repository upgrade can include schema updates. So it's very important that you back up your database first, because that's the only way to roll back from those schema updates once they applied. You will have you probably have seed data updates. That is also outside the repository. It can be list of values or runtime events or whatnot related to the changes that Oracle made. So again, database backup is very crucial to take because of that. Then, of course, you have the namesake repository update, which is CIF files. And you can have a fourth type of updates to the manifest. And we are updating to 24.6, and we want to check out the Redwood theme. So that's where the manifest comes into play. So if you're looking basically to prepare your repository upgrade, you identify the version you come from. You obtain the zip file by running the installation once, or updating one machine, or running the update and not running the repository upgrade. So you get that zip file easily. And then take your time to explore that zip file and understand what will be the changes. So you don't have to go blindfolded into a repository upgrade. So let's quickly look at these folders. 2311 just has repository. So it's very clear there's no other files than that config file, but the repository folder only has a repository CIF file. So the changes are delivered as CIF files. Imagine the CIF files being imported automatically as part of the repository upgrade, done through the command line cpdef cli, and it uses the merge option. So when you know about the CIF import options, there's in case of conflicts, override or skip or merge, which is the default. So it runs a repository import of a CIF file from Oracle, external developers, if you will, and it merges into your repository. So we'll come to that in a few moments. That is important to understand, that merge process, because that can cause conflicts if you happen to have worked or edited the same standard objects that are inside those CIF files. So that's the first CIF file that will be imported. And if you go down those folders, folder by folder, in your wingspan, there's another one for 23.12. You will find for almost every release, every monthly release, there is a repository CIF file, even if in the release notes, it does not mention any features that require repository upgrade. So there's always a slight repository upgrade in every release. Most of the time it's related to bug fixes that Oracle does, or minor features, or configuration instructions. In the release notes, you have configuration instructions, and you can optionally implement them manually if it affects your project. But the config instructions are also delivered as part of the repository upgrade, so you don't have to do them manually. So that explains why you have a repository.sif file in every monthly release, even if the release notes do not explicitly mention that there is a repository upgrade required for obtaining a specific feature. Now, of course, SIF files are interesting to open as XML as they are, which is one way you could use to just, locate the objects. But that's, of course, very, very painstaking. It's looking at the plain XML, so we're not doing that. But you have another tool, you have literally Siebel tools. You can open those SIF files and see what happens, or what would happen. So again, you don't import those files manually, but you can start the import in Siebel tools or even web tools and see what objects are in there and what would happen in your repository in terms of conflicts. So what differences are in those files. So what I've done here in Siebel tools, I created a workspace. You should create that workspace just for evaluation purposes. You delete it later on. You don't do anything in that workspace. You just use it to have a state of your project. I'm right under the latest main I have here. So that's my production state. And I create that temporary evaluation workspace. I have it open. And now I can go to Tools, Import from Archive. And of course, as you would expect, as you would guess, I will start by opening each and every folder within that wingspan of my update from 23.10. So 23.11 would where I start, and open the repository SIF file, and voila, you have the objects included in that file. So you can sort here and do a first evaluation, very quick visual evaluation. Okay, there are some applets, business components, business services listed here. Of course, these are standard objects. They might or might not exist in your repository. You don't know yet. But if they exist in the repository, they will be updated. And if you have never touched that object, you're good. Yeah, so take a moment with your development team and say, okay, this, for example, partner message list applet. Did we ever configure that? Maybe you want to double check, but most of the time you're 100% sure, no, we never touched that. It's not even relevant for us, so let's ignore it. Or these business components, these are system business components like for test automation, so you probably never touched them. Or the workflow admin service, it's a standard business service, but it's a system-related business service. It's very unlikely that you touch those. But keep in mind that, yeah, you have maybe 1 or 2 decades of Siebel development, so you might have touched that object in your project already. So, and keep the merge, which is the default, and you can click next. Nothing will happen. It will not import anything. It will just do a preview. It will compare the object differences. So that is also information you can get after the repository import, but that's after the fact. It has already happened inside the safe confines of a integration workspace. But anyway, they already have happened and you need to identify them. So here it's easier to be prepared. So now we can see those business components and they all exist already. And for example, this one will have a user prop that's updated. So deep delete will be added because it doesn't exist in the repository and the file. So you know enough about SIF files to understand that information. So there's a new user property. And if Oracle adds something new, and even if you have modified that business component, it's probably fine. I say probably because there is a chance that when you touch that business component, and Oracle touches it, you will be a little bit in trouble. And we will just touch that business component just to see what happens, or we touch a different one actually, because it's an unlikely scenario that you touch this one, because it's so system related. Same with those business services, but you can even go down that route, and I know it's time consuming, but understand what happens here. So there's a new argument for a business service method added, and so forth. At this point, you will cancel out of here. So you have done your inspections and the detective work, the forensics, and you cancel. And then, of course, you go to the next. And it's completely voluntary to do that and invest that time. You might say it's a waste of time, but here is the repository upgrade 23.12, same procedure. Start the repository CIF file, understand the object types and changes, cancel out, and so forth. So now let's take a look at a later one, which is the 24.5. So notice in 24.5 there's a schema change. You have a schema RU CIF file. So schema changes also have to be in the design repository, but they will also be physically applied. But okay, that's interesting. What schema change is it? It's just as easy as opening the CIF file. So see, okay, a table you probably are using the SEVT Act for activities. And what change does Oracle have in mind? The project's not locked. It's not an issue. What change does Oracle do? Oh, Oracle is modifying, is adding two indexes. And what columns? Okay, so if you happen to have a custom index on those columns, etc., or yeah, you now know what will happen during the repository upgrade. There will be two indexes added to a very crowded table, probably not in your DR, because usually you don't have millions of activities in the DR unless you clone your production, make it DR somehow. But in test and production environments, that could be significant because of just adding the index will just take minutes, or even hours sometimes. So you are prepared, you know. Now you know. Cancel out of here, of course. Then let's import. So that's the schema RU CIF file. That indicates in this monthly update, Oracle has a schema change. There's also seed data. We can't open that here in Siebel Tools, so there's no CIF files, but there's a repository. And let's check out the repository for 24.5. So Oracle, again, updates several applets, business components, integration objects related to ISS promotions. So if you're an astronaut on the ISS, no, I'm kidding. So yeah, and that's a business component some customers might have touched, so it's likely. And so I will modify that business component on purpose and run that preview, and we'll see what happens. So here I have another evaluation workspace. I haven't really touched on that business component, so I created a workspace and made changes. So let me open that workspace. And here, let's find the business component that has been changed. Okay, that's quite a lot, but here it is. Let's query again. So what I did here on purpose, just to drive home the point, what will happen during a repository upgrade if you have touched that standard object. So I have touched it. I made some comments to remind myself. And the comment is, I added a sort spec and a search spec. So very common that you add or modify a sort and search spec in a standard BC, right? So I did something very obvious. ID is not null, which is a dummy search spec. And I added a sort specification, sequence, and type. So before the standard, before 24.5, those are empty, right? And we will see what happens in in 24.5 when you run any repository upgrade to 24.5 and later. So I've, of course, have a reason of choosing those two properties on the BC. And on the field level, very often customers also make changes on the field level. They, of course, adding custom fields, not a big deal. So let's just add a custom field and make it calculated just to have something. So that's a custom field, and it's completely safe because of the merge logic. But changes to existing fields. And what could you do to existing fields? Well, you could make it required, for example. So I check the required flag for this field. That's my customization. And in the other field, I also changed the pre-default value. There was an existing pre-default value of days, and I changed it to months. And I also made it required. So these are typical changes that customers would do in standard business components and their fields and other objects. So they stand as an example of what would happen, right? So now if you open a workspace where you have that state of the object, which is your customizations before the repository upgrade, and you would run that import from archive. So now, and you can ignore the other objects. You know, okay, it's about this one business component. So you can remove the objects from the listing here. You're not deleting anything. So you're just removing the objects. So you just pretend I just want to import this from Oracle CIF file, but you will not complete the import. Again, it's just for evaluation. So keep the merge option because that's what Oracle does at the repository upgrade runtime. And let's see, okay, now what would happen to this business component in our repository where we have already modified it. So, and you can see that the merge logic identifies the comments, and here gets interesting because of the merge logic, file being the default resolution. My comment would be removed. It says resolution file, and file is an empty value. So it will override, it will merge, but it will take the value from the file, which is an empty value. And for comment, okay, I can live with that, but I cannot live with that on the search specification. Okay, I want to really emphasize the fact that this will remove the search specification, set it back to the standard. You basically go back to the standard because you import a standard object using the merge option. There's no other way. At the time of recording, this is what will happen during the repository upgrade, and you need to be aware of that and prepared. And this is, I'm taking the time here to allow you to understand this is how you can prepare yourself, how you can brace yourself. So this will happen. You cannot avoid it when you run the repository upgrade, but you know it has happened. And I will also point out tools from Oracle that allow you to identify those changes. And you can also revert back, right? So there are several ways of recovering from this, but it will happen in a safe space, in a safe workspace, and you can recover. And of course, the same happens to the sort specification. Here is a case where Oracle has actually changed the value. Oracle has added that sort spec in 24.5. We already had one. And since the resolution is file, it will get wiped out and replaced with the standard. So basically what happens, your standard objects go back to the standard through that CIF merge import. What happens to our fields? The Alex field is fine. It's in the repository, so the action is repository. The custom fields will stay. Anything you create in terms of custom object definitions, you're fine. Yeah, don't worry about them. But when you modify standard object definitions, such as this field, again, you see the merge logic applies the file resolution by default. So the comments get wiped out and my required flag goes back to the standard of no. With flags, very easy. Oracle says no, or and you say yes, and it's the standard is no. It goes back to the standard. And the same, of course, is true for any other property, such as this standard field with the pre-default value file will be the resolution for all three conflicts. Okay, so hopefully made that clear. That's what happens to objects which have clear record by record definitions. Now let's take a look what would happen to a workflow process if we modify a standard workflow process. Cancel out of here. You don't want to import this. Never ever. You just want to evaluate what would happen or what will happen. So here's the workflow that is a standard workflow, and it will be updated if you run the repository upgrade 24.5 and higher. And that workflow is called ISS Promotion Create Agreement Details. It's a standard workflow, and it might be a super rare case, but it applies to any standard workflow that you modify. And I made some modifications here. So I basically moved the standard steps aside to make room for a custom step, which is a random business service really, but let's imagine some custom logging taking place. So I inserted a new step into my workflow, and then I realigned or reconnected all these standard connectors. That's a very common development task. So you insert some step, you reconnect, and these are still standard objects, the connectors, the branches, and the only new object is this business service and that connector. And you also, of course, you will modify standard steps. So I've touched a few standard steps that I know will be modified in the import. These Siebel operations deactivate and resume suspend. So I just want to update the shape color just to indicate, okay, something happened, right? Okay, so these have been custom. The red one is a really new custom step, and the yellow are customized standard steps. And the customization, I added a comment in the input property here, input argument, and I also modified the input argument value. And there's a search spec which I also touched and modified. So I have a custom search spec here on that Siebel operation step. And actually I did not touch that one, except of course for moving it around and changing the shape. So, well, we can probably add an output argument at this point, or just maybe touch on that here. So I quickly added or modified the search spec with a dummy ID is not null prefix. And so just to keep it operational under all circumstances. So yeah, these and many more changes you can imagine will be done on standard workflows throughout a lot of customer projects. So let's see what would happen to this workflow if we run the repository upgrade. So we can simulate this by importing the CIF file. So I go to import from archive. And I pick the 24.5, which has that same workflow. So I will just focus on that workflow by removing all or any other object from that import window. Again, you're not deleting anything here. And now it will compare the existing object in my test workspace and will show me what is different. So, well, it will be merged, so there's no changes on the workflow level, but on the workflow step level, we see that by moving those steps around, we see that the layout information changes. So, and that resolution again in the merge action means it will be moved back, it will be reverted back to the standard layout. So the positioning and coloring will be just back to standard. So it will, well, at least mangle your workflow. And then we have the custom step that we added. This will be added just fine at that same place where we put it, right? And we have, for example, the deactivate step that we modified. So again, that also will have its layout modified back to the standard. And the branch connector that I reconnected to the custom logging step will be connected back to the end. So that's it for the workflow, right? So when that merge runs, the workflow is dead because it doesn't do what it should do. So your customizations will be back to the standard. You will have a custom business service, but you would have to reconnect it, at the very least. And what happened to these arguments? So again, file wins in case of conflict, because that's the default in the merge action. So my comment will be obliterated and my changes to the value will be obliterated. So yeah, bad things will happen to that workflow. So we will also try to understand how to recover from this. So again, this is just an evaluation. We can start the import wizard for CIF files to understand what is different if we already understand that in our project we have touched this standard workflow. So it's important to keep good documentation, keep a good inventory of standard objects that you modify, and that will help you in your repository upgrade. So yeah, let's understand a few more things about the repository upgrade. So for example, 24.5, very rich. If you look at the extracted folder, these are the files that the repository upgrade will use. So we have taken plenty of time to understand the repository impact of the repository upgrade. That's where the name comes from. But we also have seed changes, seed data import, we have schema changes, and we have sometimes manifest. So if you go to 24.6, there will be manifest in the repository upgrade. 24.5, for example, also has a schema change. We have explored already the CIF file where you can see the table names. There's also a table names text file. It's easier maybe to understand which tables are modified. And there's seed data changes. So the seed repository upgrade folder RU has for every language that you run seed data. Let's check out ENU. And there's a seed.dat file. So that's, and an import file. So you basically see the import statements. So see already which tables will be filled with additional seed data from Oracle. And if you want to understand that data, you can carefully open that .dat file. It's half binary, so it's a bit hard to read, but it's pretty clear that there are several records in this table, a few more records in this table, and you can even make out the records, right? So typical seed data records here for, in this case, integration map. So integration component map, integration field map. So some mappings will be inserted or updated. So that's how you can understand those seed data changes. If you find the seed files or seed folder, there will be seed data changes in this release, 24.5 that is. And 24.5 does not have any manifest, but 24.6 has a big one. And you can see that by presence of a file manifest RU SQL, which is post-import updates to the manifest, and probably in the seed data file. Nope, doesn't seem like it. No, that's just that's a list of values for the Redwood theme. The new drop-down value for selecting the Redwood theme for in the user settings. That's there. And the manifest is imported here with, actually insert statements into the respective manifest tables. So that's a very hard import using SQL here. So, okay, that's how Oracle does it. And of course, that's the manifest that's relevant for getting, being able to use the Redwood theme. As you can see, literally the file entry for the Redwood theme and the Ask Oracle page are listed here, along with updates to the homepage applets, which also get an updated web template. So that is pretty much proof that the Redwood theme will only be available when you run the repository upgrade in 24.6 and higher, because that really inserts the manifest records here into your development environment. Remember, the repository upgrade only runs in the development environment, so we will also have to talk about how do we get these changes into the runtime environment, RR environment, test or production, because we don't run repository upgrade on those environments. We have to use the migration application. Okay, so it's going to be a very interesting ride. So this was the first part of a discussion, what will happen during a repository upgrade. And of course, now we will have to do the actual update to 24.6, run post-install database update, and then we can run repository upgrade. So to follow these steps, take a look at the next videos, and they will do that in great detail. Thanks much for watching this one. Take care and bye-bye.